Hi, welcome to another episode of Vetted. I'm your host, Jen Markevich Wagman, founder and president of the nonprofit veteran service organization Gen Vets. And on this week's podcast, you will hear a candid conversation I had with John Schmitt, the CEO of iXpressGenes, on February 21st, 2025 in Nashville, Tennessee, at the inaugural United We Transform Veterans Health Summit. A day that was filled with impactful workshop sessions with nonprofits, community leaders, government agency leaders, healthcare professionals, and businesses focused on supporting the mental health of U.S. military, veterans, and their families at Operation Stand Down, Tennessee. Dr. Schmitt is a 20-year Army veteran. He's a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel who flew Blackhawks with the 101st Airborne Division on multiple missions during his 2 tours in Iraq. He also served as an Aviation and Acquisition Corps officer. His roles included serving as an assistant professor at the United States Military Academy at West Point, leadership positions in science and technology, and involvement in major defense acquisition programs. Dr. Schmitt earned his degree in microbiology from UC Davis, his MS from Vanderbilt University's School of Medicine. At iXpressGenes, John and his team are pioneers in the field of precision medicine, particularly through their groundbreaking trauma autoimmune indicator, or TAI, test. This revolutionary advancement is designed to help and empower healthcare providers to detect trauma-induced diseases, such as PTSD, before they escalate at an early stage. By doing so, they aim to minimize human suffering and alleviate the pressures on our overstrained mental health systems. But the inception of the TAI test itself is rooted in tragedy. On the afternoon of February 12, 2010, co-founder of iXpressGenes, Dr. Joe Nee, was attending a biology department faculty meeting at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, Alabama, with at least a dozen faculty members inside a conference room. At the conclusion of the meeting, a disgruntled faculty member, who was not tenured, pulled a gun from her purse and began firing at her coworkers. She shot 6 colleagues, 3 of whom died instantly. 3 others who were shot survived. However, one would die 7 years later from complications secondary to the gunshot and trauma. Dr. Joe Nee saw the critical gap in our understanding of trauma and its long-term effects on mental health. This pivotal moment propelled him into research and development, leading to the creation of the TAI test and a mission to change the landscape of mental health care. During this podcast, John shares his insights into the evolution of the TAI test and how it represents a significant step forward in the fight against trauma-related conditions. He'll discuss the profound impact that early detection can have on patients, the military community, and veterans in particular, and the healthcare system as a whole. He also speaks about how his personal experiences have shaped his mission at iXpressGenes. And without further ado, Dr. Schmitt. Hi.
Hey,
thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Please
Thanks so
yourself and your company to my audience.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I'm John Schmitt. I'm the CEO of iXpressGenes.
Mm-hmm.
The company itself, was founded by Joe Ng. He was we're obviously business partners now. He's a professor at University of Alabama, Huntsville, and he was in a staff meeting when one of his colleagues pulled out a .45 and killed 3 people in front of him and shot 3 others. And out of that tragedy, which actually celebrating, it's the wrong word, but it's 15th anniversary this month, out of that tragedy, he recognized the spectrum of resilience among his peers. And he said, there has to be an immunological component to this. Mm-hmm. Did a small study, fast forward, here we are, and we're launching a product that's, set to show the underlying inflammation that leads to what we know of as post-traumatic stress disorder and other trauma-related disease. Myself, I joined the team in 2018, 20-year Army veteran. Struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety depression, after my second deployment, as it built over years. And so for me, I feel like I've weathered the storm, but a lot of folks have not. And so for me, this is much more than business. This is, a life's purpose. So
what is your background beyond the Army? Did you have some sort of biochemistry that I wouldn't understand, but go ahead and try and explain for the audience.
I had a very weird military career, and honestly, it is hard to imagine a more serendipitous, career that brought me to a place where I think I found my life purpose. So I went to UC Davis, and I joined ROTC literally just to pay for college. Obviously, there was no war, so for me it was completely transactional. Obviously, service has always been a really important part of my life, but I wasn't going to go fight in Iraq or Afghanistan like a lot of the kids that I ended up teaching. Mm-hmm. I was a UH-60 pilot, and then I became a maintenance test pilot. And then I ended up going to teach at West Point. But before that, I had to go get an advanced degree. The Army required us to do that. So, in scrambling and trying to find a degree while I was in Iraq at the time, I found a program at Vanderbilt in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. So I got a degree in immunology. I couldn't even spell it at the time. But little did I know that this would be a really important part of my, of being able to continue this season with iXpressGenes. I spent the next 10 years doing, after teaching at West Point, I spent the next 10 years doing weapon system development at Redstone Arsenal, so mostly in aviation and missile. So I think the perspective that offered was being able to see things from basic research all the way through to full-scale production. I think that it's just very fortunate to see that whole gamut, on large scale, and understand the importance of tech transition and the importance of getting through the valley of death and commercialization. So all of that, my last program in the acquisition corps was the CH-47 modernization program, mm-hmm. And then I left the Army and retired in 2020. Stood up a nonprofit in town that worked on advanced manufacturing, which again, another hard left turn, but mm-hmm. really that was to be able to build an organization from scratch as a private-public partnership that was involved in community engagement and education and workforce development, but also highly technical, and standing that up to make it successful and self-sustaining before I decided to just bet on this technology and bet on this opportunity to bring the trauma autoimmune indicator to market. So, which is where we are today, and in the next month we'll be able to offer it commercially for the first time. It's important to understand why we're doing it, right? Mm-hmm. If you take post-traumatic stress disorder and you boil it down to its hallmark components, it's really pathologies of anxiety or depression at the end of it. Anxiety depression in this case is created through buildup of oxidative stress across the blood-brain barrier, which is a really slow process, which takes a lot of time, but also means it takes a lot of time to subside. So that oxidative stress is created through inflammation. We can detect the inflammation. So, and in a nutshell, the big picture is we were never meant to be in fight or flight for days, weeks, years mm-hmm. of our life. We were only intended to do it for very short periods of time. So it's no wonder that we essentially create an autoimmune disorder against our own stress. And of course, stressful occupations where you remain in fight or flight obviously exacerbate the autoimmune disorder. You see a lot of talk in functional medicine now about the accumulation of stress and the accumulation of trauma, and I think this is really the biochemical aspect of that. So detecting that early, you can get in front of. You could say, before the disease presentation occurs, mm-hmm. we have a use case for that. If you're currently in treatment, this is that objective, data-driven thing where we can give to clinicians to help them understand whether or not that treatment is being effective for that patient population. And I think, most importantly, 7% of the population is thought to have PTSD or have a diagnosis.
Interesting.
And so
the blood work that you get then determines whether you see these reactive proteins. Is that what it is?
No. So we look at RNA. So okay. and not to give a biology lesson, but DNA is what you're born with. Mm-hmm. If it makes RNA. So if RNA is present, it's currently doing the thing. Okay. It's making proteins. Okay. So and if it's dysregulation kind of by definition is disease, right? Mm-hmm. So a person with a unresolved trauma, because really trauma is about, what our lizard brain wants us to do is protect us, right, from whatever. So it creates its mechanisms to keep fight or flight in presence. That stress creates that inflammation, and the inflammation can be seen as a dysregulation fingerprint.
Okay.
That's very specific.
Okay.
Well, there was a study that was done, as a European healthcare study, that was about 58,000 medical records, about 18,000, I think, that with folks with PTSD. If you look at those, every single category except for pregnancy is 1.5 to 700% more likely with those with PTSD. So we like to refer to it as trauma-induced disease. So, and unfortunately, in that category is also cancers. You're you're more likely to have cancers. You're more likely, the largest ALS treatment center is run by the VA, right? So, females tend to have a higher incidence of MS with PTSD, and and you go across the gamut from rheumatoid arthritis to Crohn's disease, lupus, all our autoimmune diseases. We think it has a very similar mechanism.
Okay, this is interesting. And so, is there more than just this with the studies that are being done? Has VA recognized this as something? The causal relationships of that, has that been something that is recognized more and more? Are there more studies that are showing this?
There I wouldn't say that there's a lot of studies, but I would say that there's the academic research is catching up.
Okay.
Right. So we were probably 3 to 5 years ahead of the curve, but now we're starting to see the academic research catch up to us, which is great. Which means it's certainly validation for us. As far as the VA goes, we have a clinical trial ongoing with VA Birmingham currently.
Wonderful. Okay.
And then we hope to start a large multi-site national pilot.
Okay.
We're done studying. We want to show the clinical efficacy of the product itself. So put it in the hands of clinicians, train them up, and then follow those patients throughout their journey. And we hope we're hoping that gets funded, by our friends in Congress, and we're hoping to see that, hopefully one way or the other in the next few months.
So tell me right now where things stand. Have you gone public with this yet? Are you? So
we've done kind of regional soft launch. We are raising money right now. So we are a private company. So we're in our Series A raise right now. But we need CLIA approval, for lab developed test status. We are on path to have that in the next 30 days.
Wonderful.
And then we can offer it commercially. We'll start initially, because we one thing I learned in weapon system development is low rate production is a great place to learn, get your processes down before you go full rate. So we're going to kind of keep it regional at first, and then transition some of our smaller partners so we can get process procedures down correctly, and then we'll expand state by state.
And how will it work? How does the product work? Do you go in? Can you explain that?
Great question. Yeah. So if we partner with a healthcare system or a hospital or a large clinic that has on-site phlebotomy, we would just be another blood draw, right?
Okay.
Like you go in for your annual, or your doctor orders you a test for, let's say, iron or lead or something, some toxicity study. They would just add another vial and they would ship it to our facility. Alternatively, we have a kit that can be done at home. So a provider purchases or orders a test online. That kit gets shipped to the patient, and there's a small button that you just click. You return a little 1 milliliter vial of blood to us, and then we provide those results back to the provider. So there's a model that's pretty similar already. You do cortisol or even Cologuard or some of these other things that model is pretty well established now. So we're just kind of following in best practices.
So what are the results going to tell the doctor, and then what is the doctor going to tell you, and then what's going to be the treatment plan? How does that work, or to the extent you can hypothesize on?
So and I think it is important to know that we're not mental health care professionals, right?
I understand.
So for
us,
just
give the sort of an idea, general idea.
So if you think about it right now, what we do is we wait for people to get into crisis. And then they go get help.
Okay.
And then now you're triaging crisis.
Okay.
It would be very similar protocols, right? Or even the PTSD-5 screening survey that we all lied about when we were in uniform, because there's no way we were going to get booted by self-reporting ourselves having a mental illness, which is ridiculous, but that's the pendulum has swung both ways, and none of us were going to get caught in that. So basically, just at first, we are just better than that. We're catching it earlier, same protocols as far as how you would treat somebody that's dealing with trauma and prolonged stress, right? I think very quickly, since we now have something objective that you can look at and you can monitor besides, how do you feel, or, hey, do this survey, are you depressed, are you feeling like you don't like to do things anymore, like those questions that are in the surveys. Now you have an objective physiological thing where we're taking away all the stigma. You go through treatment, whether it's an extensive protocol that includes neurofeedback and cold plunging and IR therapy, hyperbaric oxygen, even ibogaine, ayahuasca, whatever. Now you've got something that you can objectively look at and go, did that work? That tool is not available right now, right? It's all subjective feedback. I think I feel better. Yeah, I think so. I've resolved this, and only the individual can tell. But now you've got something that objectively can share with the clinician whether or not that treatment is working, and hopefully create a standard of care where, the care is escalated should the test not come back accurately. So, great example is cholesterol. In the 80s we thought we couldn't prevent heart disease, right? Now we've got a simple test that we test cholesterol every year, right? And so you take that test, and your doctor, for the first time, it's above a certain level, and your doctor goes, hey, let's work on diet. I'm gonna check you again in 6 months. Check you again in 6 months, is still high. Okay, we're gonna put you on the first statin. Let's see how that works. And then you go to the next one, and let's say it's still not resolved. Okay, we're gonna try a different statin, right? Like, our system is very well attuned to that process. We want to be the same thing. Right, but the problem is there's no standard of care necessarily developed. But I think we have the partners, especially here at this workshop, that we can build those partners to build that standard of care that could be nationally recognized. Right now, it's choose your own adventure.
Yes,
right?
That's a great way to put it.
So, you're like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to go to a therapist. You go to a therapist and you start doing cognitive behavioral therapy or something that's less invasive, but you may be already at a place where you need to have something that affects your neuroplasticity in order for that to be helpful. Or you may be, in so much neuroinflammation or in such an unstabilized state that you may need something more invasive, right? Something more severe. And like right now, it's like, I don't know, I read about this thing, I'm going to go to a retreat in Mexico and get ibogaine. So what we want to do is we think that there's a place for all of these, right? We just want to be able to be the thing that supports that modality and its effect. Right, because there is a place for cognitive behavioral therapy. There's a place for meditation and mindfulness, and very important place. There's also a place for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy or an equine retreat. Like, there's a place for all of these.
Everybody is different. Each individual is different and reacts differently to different things. It's not one size fits all.
So, we want to create the tool to help the clinicians and to help the therapist and to help the individual just take control of that journey, as opposed to, I'm going to roll the dice, I'm going to try equine therapy, it didn't work for me, and I'm going to give up. There's an uphill battle, especially with, class ones, right? Like, there's an uphill battle to even get studies done, right? You're working on an old system from the 70s that classified it in the first place, and, we know they help because dudes are going and gals are going to Peru and Mexico to get it done, and they're coming back with great effect. And I think we're finally getting to a place where there's enough interest and political pressure from non-traditional folks that are helping move that ball. And then all we want to do is give them one more tool to support and show that it is effective. On my journey, I was suicidal, and what I needed some help, but I didn't need the sledgehammer. So I was on a pretty high dosage of Wellbutrin, and then I did cognitive therapy and exposure therapy, and worked heavily on journaling and mindfulness and meditation, and in a couple of years I was in a much better place, and I think I'm well managed now. I'm off the drugs, but however, there's folks that are much more complex in trauma, and then you include childhood trauma where their foundational structure of relationships and dopamine seeking are totally different than somebody else, and that's going to be something that's going to be a lot more complicated. And so, I'm not here to judge. We just want to provide the objective tool to get whatever the treatment needs to be shown that it's effective.
Is this strictly for the military and veteran community that you're working, or do you plan to use this outside of?
I think, I spent the last 10 years in the DoD acquisition system, so I'm well aware of the challenges of getting into federal government acquisition.
What?
So while we're banging on that door as hard as we can with as much force and building the coalition to make that effective, we've found the most traction as a commercial company is in direct primary care and self-insured payer groups and folks that are interested in, imagine that, health. Okay. And just by the numbers, right? PTSD is a $230 billion burden on the United States economy, about $1 trillion worldwide. You're only looking at, cancer, and this is horrible to say, is only $200 billion, right? So this is a bigger problem than even cancer, and it's unaddressed. So, 82% of PTSD in the United States is non-veteran related.
Is that right?
And 66% of it is women, and it doesn't even account childhood trauma, which we don't even really have a valid assessment for. It is a problem that affects somewhere between 7 and 12% of the population. It's almost as much as diabetes, and look how much we pay attention to diabetes. But there's shame and stigma and all these things that keep us from discussing it openly. But I think we're finally opening the door to that conversation in this country, and the time is now, and the people that do it is the people that are in this room. It's exciting. It's an exciting time.
Well, again, I need you to come back on in a couple months when things progress, and I can't wait to hear how things go. However I can help you in this, I'm your partner. So.
I appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you so much.
It's been great having you on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
Walk in the parking lot, we're on our phone, and a car almost backs over us. We go through fight or flight. It's a series of hormones that create all of those things. Blood pressure, heart rate, all those things we think of as fight or flight. Immediately behind that is a second cascade of hormones that resolves the first. This is the cycle that's kept us alive since we were in the caves, right? Bear comes out, whatever, we go run. We're meant to do it for 30 seconds. We're never meant to do it for days, weeks, years of our lives. These become immunogenic and create an autoimmune disorder. That autoimmune disorder creates inflammation. And I say that in quotes because it's a whole bunch of things. That leads to oxidative stress buildup, which leads to the anxiety depression. This is what we're thinking of as our first part of this product, right? Is we can detect this years before the disease occurs. The problem is this inflammation is also pathways, as I mentioned, that lead to cancer. Some people, it leads to connective tissue disorders. Other people's, it's thyroid dysfunction, metabolic diseases. Our version 2 and 3 of this test is going to allow clinicians to not only say, hey, not only is trauma creating downstream effects for this individual, but specifically add cancer screenings to the thing while we get them stabilized, while we get them under control as far as their stress and unresolved trauma. There's other things physiological, we got to get them in place. You're 5 times more likely to have ALS and MS if you have PTSD. You're more likely to have cancers, rheumatoid arthritis. These are all connected. So if you think about the model that we've built, and I've just heard so many people in so many places on this landscape. If you're an individual, that's a terrible pen. If you're an individual and let's just say a car accident, you go through a period of trauma. You think of sight, sound, smell, and fight or flight. You connect those things right there. If I intervene right here, I can give you the tools to disconnect those. Trigger identification, reframing, remodeling. You can get yourself out of this. The longer we go, and that autoimmune disorder kicks in, that oxidative stress builds up over time, especially if they're in a high stress, high impact job. Now you start seeing anxiety, depression. Now you start seeing the drop of dopamine. Now you start seeing things like dopamine seeking activities, drug abuse, sex abuse, all these dopamine seeking activities, high risk behaviors. These things create habits, they create behaviors, that then become personality traits. This no longer looks like this. It looks like this. And And now you've got a feedback mechanism that keeps you in chronic fight or flight. So what we think of is somewhere in here, to the right, you need to have some sort of massive intervention of neuroplasticity, right? And there's tons of modalities that go down this way. Ibogaine, EMDR, all of those things. All of those places have a place along this continuum. On this side, this is where we think of things that are more self-soothing, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, breathing, mindfulness. There is a continuum of care that needs to be built. And I think from all the people in this room, this is where we fit in, is we're that testing mechanism all the way along the way. Is it working here? It's not working there, let's go more severe. It's working here, it's not, okay, let's go more severe. It is working great. Now we've got you stabilized, we're gonna give you all those tools for self-soothing. So we're not a silver bullet in any way, shape, or form. We wanna enable y'all. Folks that are out there on the front lines doing the care. One of the things that kept coming up in the groups was, how do we get to these folks? They don't want to tell us. They don't need to tell us. We can just say, there's no stigma here, man. Your body is just really pissed off. We got to resolve that stress. And once you get them into that therapy, it's a totally different situation because we're all lizard brains, right? Like at the end of the day, our body is fighting ourselves to keep ourselves safe. We got to get them out of that space. But we don't have the tools. I think this is the tool. We've been fighting the wrong problem this whole time because when we're spending 2.5 times more than any country on health, and our suicide rates increased by 40% since 2000, we're fighting the wrong problem. I think that we can find the right problem. I think this has to do with it. I think this has to do with compounded stress. Anyway, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.